myself and Andrew are going to just recap a couple of the key takeaways that we shared at the last event, basically just to set a bit of context that's going to be helpful throughout the rest of the session today. It should only take sort of 10 to 15 minutes. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of the spectrum of AI capability. So over the past 2-3 years, interest in generative AI has massively shot up. It was basically sparked by the public release of ChatGPT in November 2022. It got a lot of interest, and what we found was people were often just sort of narrowly focusing on generative AI and thinking, okay, how can we use generative AI in our company? How can we bring value to our company through generative AI, basically? But what we found is you can't really start with generative AI. You have to start with the business case and the data you've got, and then think about how different technologies apply. And then if you're looking at AI and you think it might be the solution, you shouldn't just be looking narrowly at generative AI. You should be looking at the sort of wider scale, and that's what I'll talk through now. So AI is basically the umbrella term. It's the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. A subset of that, obviously quite a large subset of that, is machine learning. Machine learning is about technology learning from data rather than needing to be explicitly programmed. Then deep learning is machine learning that leverages large multi-layer neural networks. And then generative AI models are built from deep learning models. So these models generate new outputs that are indistinguishable from human-created content. So hopefully that sets just a bit of a basis around what we're talking about when we're going to use some of these different terms. And I'll hand over to Andrew now to talk you through a few more key takeaways.
Yeah, so for most of today's session, we're going to walk through a series of business cases. And as Robbie said, Trevor will give us a bit of an overview of some of the market and the players in the market. And as we do all of that, it's useful to understand going into that how we at Thorogood think about applying AI and applying the wider field of data and AI. As Robbie says, we don't want to just focus on generative AI, certainly. We want to focus on the whole field of data and AI. So it's useful to think about how we design some of these systems. And for a long time, we've used an approach that we refer to as both ends into the middle. But it's helpful to kind of tease out what we mean by that. So we'll start on one side of the picture with business cases, personas, user interactions, right? Thinking about what are the business objectives and the business goals, and keep that front and center of our thinking. On the other side, to design data solutions, we think about what data is available, what's the data analysis that's currently being run, where are we getting data from, what data do we have, what data could we have? And then we try to work from both of those things into designing a solution that allows you to use that data to make better decisions. And so when we're working from the business cases and the business perspective on one side, that looks a lot like thinking about dimensions, hierarchies, and measures. And granted, we could put different lists there as the technologies evolve. But really, when we talk about dimensions, it's thinking about things like products, geographies, time, all sorts of things. The way that we think about data and the way that we split data up in our heads when we're thinking about our businesses. For measures, you could be talking about sales values, everything through from kind of sales performance, commercial performance, into things like operational excellence, and optimizing processes. So all sorts of measures that we look at across the business. And typically we're looking at combinations of those dimensions, hierarchies, and measures. On the other side, when we're thinking about data, we're thinking about often different sources of data and how we're bringing them together. So how are we storing the data and merging it to make the most of it? And so in doing that, what we're trying to build in the middle is a solution that brings those things together. And typically then we're looking at a fast, responsive, often multi-source, often multi-query data analytics solution that allows us to bring those two ends together. And traditionally, if I bring up some of the list that we'd have seen maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we'd have been talking about relational databases and semantic layer as the tools in the middle, and helping us to bring our data sources, which might have been ERP, CRM, into things like electronic point of sale data coming from stores or other third-party data sources, so that we can understand not just what's happening inside our companies, but maybe what's happening in competitors. And bringing that to the user, often through things like reports, dashboards, scorecards, moving into things like alerts and web apps. And really with the innovation in the last few years, we'll call it the cloud era and beyond, what we see is an increase in all of these areas that affects the richness of the solutions that we're able to build. So we're still thinking about the business cases and the user interactions, but now we have options like chat, natural language, looking at things like automating insights so that the alerts are based on automated views of the data, into things even like voice control that we'll see a little bit later. On the data sources side, we're able to access more than we ever could before, moving beyond the structured data sources that are still really important to our organizations, but augmenting that with information that's stored in PDFs, images, coming from things like meeting recordings, Internet of Things sensors, and other sources. So we've got a whole range of things more available to us than we had before. And in the middle, the technologies are evolving as well. So moving on from multidimensional and relational, we've got the innovation of the lakehouse being able to store data really effectively in the cloud in a way that's more flexible. And then into specialized approaches to storing data like graph databases for looking at and analyzing relationships, vector databases when we're looking at searching for documents, and using machine learning and predictive models as part of the solutions as well. So when we're thinking about applying AI in our organizations, what are the things that really we can think about doing in this new age? We should be thinking about how AI can create opportunities to answer new business questions, enhance how users are interacting with the information, and extending the empowerment of decision makers, really making it more rich ways for people to interact with and understand the data. On the other side, in terms of the data sources, think first off, how can AI contribute to the data sources you have available to you? Maybe in some cases, creating new data or augmenting data based on the sources that you have. And also then thinking about what are some of the new sources of information that you might want to start capturing now, now that you think about applications of AI down the line. And then across the solution, as we try to bring this together, how does AI change some of the data modeling and storage that you need to have in your organization to be making the most of it? Where is AI creating opportunities for more automation in development, management, and maintenance of the data foundation that you have? And how is AI influencing the governance of data and models in your organization, especially as we think about moving beyond just governing the data into thinking about governing the wider picture of how we're analyzing the data, the models that we're applying, and the AI that we're using. So that gives you a picture of how we look at building solutions in the whole field of data and AI. And as we go through today, when we talk through the business cases that will come at them in this context. I'll pull one more thing through from the last events. When we've talked to customers, we find it helpful to demystify AI. Right from when we did the presentation a year ago on 30th January, we were introducing the idea that these AI models aren't magic. And one way you can look at them is they're generating the next word, one word at a time typically. And so in continuing the sentences, they're building things up, but what they're doing is not magic. We have an understanding of what they're doing, and when we come to build solutions, having that understanding is really helpful. Second thing, it didn't come out of nowhere, and we've shown the timeline before of moving from the 1950s when AI was just a new thought, through the developments of some of the different technologies that try to address that, and up to much more recently in the 2018 onwards, where we have the transformer architecture that's giving us some of these newer large language models and the ability to use natural language in the way that we can now. But what does that mean for us? So generative AI is able to help us capture signals from unstructured data sources and combine that with our structured data sources. We're able to access far more data sets than we ever could before and bring those together in a way that is useful for analysis. But it's also important to realize when we're looking at it that generative AI is best used in combination with established data practices. Rather than looking for specific areas to apply generative AI on its own, it's useful, we tend to view it as a tool in the tool set. It's one of the phrases that we use to address your valuable business goals. So think about generative AI sitting alongside all the other tools and approaches that you've had before. And really the important thing is the data that you have and how you're making use of that data. So if I wanted to be a bit more poetic about that, perhaps, I might say that everything is data in a world where data is everything. one thing to bring this slightly up to speed, we've shown the chart on the left before. We've talked about the transformer architecture being really important to large language models. I'll highlight a couple of more recent developments just to bring it up to date. So 2024, really I would say, is when agentic AI is coming of age. And a lot of people will have heard of agentic AI, but by that really we mean the ability for these models to go outside just generating text into the point where they can use that generation approach to be calling other tools. That could be things like sending an email or logging a ticket. But when we're thinking about data solutions, often it's things like looking up data in a database or looking up documents that are relevant. So 2020, really that approach has been around since the very early stages when ChatGPT was released. But by 2024, a lot of the vendors are releasing tooling for it. The models are becoming more reliable. And so at the start of this year, at the NVIDIA CEO, Jensen Huang, in his speech, declared this the age of agentic AI. And we really are seeing that come to the fore in a lot of the solutions that we're talking to customers about. Alongside that then, we've got reasoning AI, probably the other big development at the minute. And in September 2024, OpenAI released their O1 reasoning model, which brought that approach to the world. And O1 really takes their biggest and best models and applies the newer reasoning techniques to the model rather than just answering the question immediately. First, it takes steps to lay out how it should approach the question, refines its answer, and does, as you would think if a human's doing this analysis and some of these thinking, you might lay out your steps first. Turns out by getting the model to do it, that can be effective at the cost of it taking more time and doing more work to get there. And O1 is an example of a really big model where reasoning really helps. And I'm sure most of you are aware of the release of DeepSeek on 20th January, where the R1 reasoning model, really one of the big innovations from it is that it takes a much smaller, more efficient model and shows that when you apply the same reasoning approach with a much smaller model, that's also very effective. And so a lot more organizations are thinking about how does reasoning AI apply in, maybe in some cases, how does that apply in alongside agentic?